Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Marketing 2021. We're about to get started with our 12:30 session. It's a panel discussion focused on a shared experience. We're talking about how the pandemic changed planning, creation, and dissemination. Now, I am going to hand over to Bruce Bryan, the Chief Strategy Officer at Hive9. But before I do so, let me introduce our panel of incredible marketing leaders. We have Nadja Mellon-White, the Chief Marketing Officer for Vice Media, Andrew McKechnie, the Chief Creative Officer for Verizon, Melissa Hobley, the Global Chief Marketing Officer for OkCupid, and Evan Jones, the Chief Marketing Officer for Fender. A lot of chiefs there, Bruce. I'm going to hand that over to you and let you get started with this incredible conversation.
All right. Thank you, Jasmine, and welcome everyone. Really excited to hear the stories that our panel have to tell today around how they responded to the pandemic. As we all know, the pandemic brought about major changes for all marketing teams as it touched everyone on the planet, our customers, our prospects, our employees, our suppliers and partners, even our competitors. We're going to focus our panel discussion on how four very different organizations, when you think about the brands we have represented, adapted to the challenges in real time. We're going to take a look at three specific areas. I'm going to outline those now, and then we're going to ask each panel member to respond to each of the questions, and we'll take the questions one at a time, get four responses, and move on to the next question. But the areas we're going to talk about is, number one is marketing planning and budgeting. Events were canceled, in-flight projects were stalled, budgets were slashed, employees went remote, all the while market conditions and expectations were thrown into an upheaval. So planning and budgeting were impacted first, and we're going to ask our panel members, how did their teams respond? Then we're going to move on to messaging and content creation. The impact of the pandemic was far-reaching, both in terms of businesses and consumer needs. Organizations needed to rethink their messaging, content strategy, while also not sounding tone deaf, but empathetic. Production logistics were also disrupted. So we're going to ask how our teams responded to that. And then finally, communications and message delivery were heavily disrupted with no live events. Everybody's on Zoom, et cetera. How did the teams pivot to ensure that their message got to the right audience in their new location, whatever that meant at the time? And then if we have time at the end, we'll even take some questions. But let's get started. Nadja, I'm going to go to you with planning and budgeting were impacted first. How did your team respond?
Well, I think we had to lean into being as creative as possible. A big part of the pandemic impact meant producing original content was initially going to be more difficult. So we kind of shifted the mix and used a lot more longer form video that was produced for, different formats. The other thing that we did, which is really interesting in being as efficient as possible, is we played with, we resurrected old Viceland voicemails. We started to kind of re-look at some existing IP and used it differently. We opened up the lines to act and really listen to what people were doing and use that information to help us pivot and develop new and interesting content. And the interesting thing about listening at a time when people really needed us to listen to them and lean in is that it allowed us to probably welcome even greater number of new audiences into the Vice world. And so for us, while others may say it was a setback, for us, it allowed us to kind of connect with a whole new audience and really explore new formats.
Sounds like you used it as, we hear it very often. It's not a problem, it's an opportunity. And
absolutely, it was an opportunity. And what are you going to do? Everyone pivoted on a dime. And so when you're in 25 countries around the world, what else could we do? We're creating over 2,400 pieces of content a week. We had no choice but to pivot.
That's got to be a scary prospect for some marketers out there, 2,400 a week. That's a daunting environment to be in.
What's interesting about the opportunity for us is brands came to us because they knew we had our finger on the pulse of how people were feeling. We know that we were able to probably tap into a chord in the marketplace that people had not yet tapped. And there was a level of transparency, and it's because of our high degree of trust that we have with our consumers that we were able to do this task on behalf of brands and of partners while still remaining authentic to our core customer base.
That is great. Thank you, Naja. Because you ended with the word trust, I'm going to move over to Melissa next, because obviously the trust, and I honestly, folks, I'm speaking with no experience whatsoever. My last date was August 6th of 1988. So Melissa, take it away with planning and budgeting for OkCupid.
Oh, I'm going to add some sex and dating in there, Bruce. Dating apps had a very interesting time in COVID as, to zoom out for a second, as a city went into lockdown, and OkCupid, we're global, and we are especially popular in big cities around the world, from Berlin to Chicago to New York to Delhi to Melbourne to Jakarta. And, to give you a breadth. And as a city went into lockdown with COVID, engagement on OkCupid and other dating apps skyrocketed. And that was for a number of reasons. But the largest is just, if you were single in a city, you lost all the touch points that you had. And it was a difficult time, but being on a dating app was an easy and safe way to connect with people and make friends and hopefully something more. The budget implications became interesting. Probably the best example is, we shifted dollars around, we moved things around like everybody did. And this year, as vaccinations were rolling out in the US, we wanted to be there. We wanted to be ready. And so we very quickly mobilized. We work with Maurizio Catalan, who's a prolific artist who we worked with on a campaign, OkCupid's first campaign called DTF. And we shot a campaign called Every Single Person, which that is a play on words by design. And the campaign celebrates daters that are non-binary, that are LGBTQ+, that are vegetarians, that are short, tall, young, old, all the things. And we wanted it to be loud and in cities when people were starting to return to that. So we I don't think I've ever done something that quickly in my career, coming up with those concepts, making sure that the people we shot in those campaigns were also non-binary and part of the LGBTQ community. Like, it was really authentic. And then we got it live in cities around the world, August, September, when people were starting to date again and to get out there. And I think, COVID has been really difficult and interesting for a lot of us. For OkCupid, it really was, okay, you have had a difficult, if you were single, it was a tough year and a half. We're still not obviously out of it. And how do you let people know that we want to be here for you and help you connect to someone? And so, having a campaign that said that, and in particular supporting marginalized communities and people that are underrepresented was really, really important. And so you can still see that campaign live around New York City and Chicago and Berlin and other places.
So let me ask you one short follow-up. Had you ever had the conversation prior to the pandemic? What would we do if people couldn't date in person around the entire world?
Never.
In a span of just 2 weeks?
Never had we had that conversation. If people cannot actually go on the dates, what do you do? And your immediate reaction might be like, oh gosh, we're in trouble. But actually, the engagement soared because they needed that way to connect. And what we were hearing from younger daters, in particular Gen Z daters, is, well, shit, I'm at home. My boss isn't looking over my shoulder. So I'm swiping all day. I'm messaging all day. And people got so romantic. One really popular date that I heard about at least once a week was people would do a video date and they would use Google to show their date their hometown. And they'd be like, this is my high school. This is like the pizza place we went to after every game. This is, A guy delivered a pizza via a drone to a woman in Brooklyn. We had people that were reading books together and then talking about them at night. So, it was a difficult time but there was a lot of romance. And when you overlay what was happening socially and politically, and proudly, OkCupid is the only dating app in the world matching you on issues that you care about, like reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, climate change. When you overlay those things, it's a catalyst for very powerful relationships and romance and love and whatever you're looking for. So you wait for the COVID marriage boom. Those of us that are married have spent too much time with our spouses. But if you were single and you met someone in COVID, we're going to see a lot of weddings. Let's put it that way.
That's great. Andrew, I'm going to go to you next because I'm guessing that you probably were able to anticipate pretty quickly what was going to happen when everyone needed to have more digital.
Yeah, you got that right for sure. Well, I think just in terms of the planning, and I'll kind of focus maybe a little bit on the team and how we manage this. Firstly, I'd say that the operational excellence within kind of that's embedded in the Verizon culture has helped us a lot, and that's because we were the ability to shift priorities, budgets, and planning due to the crisis is kind of like built into the DNA. You build networks to respond when people need them, right? And so that could be a natural disaster or something as simple as making an important phone call. And so I would say Verizon's network and our products, played a really integral role in the virtualization of the last 18 months, right? And for many, it became the lifeline to connection, right? Obviously, like Melissa just mentioned, but also for that personal interaction when people couldn't be physically together, but also for work and for school. And so at the onset of the pandemic, the health and safety of our employees was probably where we put our focus first. That was our biggest concern. Once we knew that our internal and our agency teams, we have a massive agency ecosystem, were kind of set up at home, they were safe. We then had to kind of like shift our process in terms of how the teams work. And within the CMO group alone, you've got, almost 1,000 people. And then if you think about the agency partners, you've got, it touches thousands. So that process in the first few months was really critical for us to be able to move fast, and also do it in a way where speed and accuracy in terms of the right thing to do was critically important. And I think one of the things that really helped us was the dynamic and the culture that we've created, with our teams. And that's one of the things I noticed now, obviously in a hybrid and a remote thing, is like the culture that we created pre-pandemic was critical to our success, because there's a comfort and a shorthand that we all know as a team, and it allowed us to move really quickly on certain actions. And so one of the things that we realized was that we have this cabinet session, which is kind of senior leaders across both Verizon and our agency partners. We would always meet on a regular basis, and that basically became the foundation for now what became a daily and sometimes hourly kind of regroup. And so that was really like almost like a war room mentality, where the early days were kind of top down. We wouldn't go through the traditional kind of concepting, creative reviews, etc. We would meet at 10 a.m. every morning, make decisions. Teams would come back at the end of the day or bring solutions to the next morning meeting, and we would move. And as time has obviously moved on, the frequency of those things have lessened, but we really did use those sessions to kind of rely on outside inputs from advisors from different industries as well to help us make those decisions. Education field, first responders, political consultants, the entertainment industry, media, production, across the whole gamut. And this was really invaluable to kind of strike the right tone for the moment in time. And so we were reacting to a lot of information, but the systems we had in place, I felt like, really allowed us to be nimble and adjust and react quickly.
Excellent, thank you. Evan, so Fender, playing a guitar, it seems like a very social thing to do, but learning a guitar is something you typically do in private. How did that balance play out for you in terms of plans and changes to the overall structure of what you were trying to accomplish with the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think the backdrop for us almost started 5 or 6 years before the pandemic. And, obviously it was an inflection point in so many ways and on so many levels for so many people. But, when I started back in 2015, 2016, part of the job was to build and rebuild a marketing engine at Fender that could help it go from sort of a trade-based organization to a consumer-based organization. And I think what we've been seeing in the last 5 or 6 years is just a complete seismic shift in the demographic and makeup of the people who are coming into guitar. They're younger, they're more diverse, they're more female than ever. And some of that has been driven by things that we've done and by things that have been happening. So for us, we've seen the explosion of artists who've picked up guitar across multiple genres in so many different ways than you're traditionally used to seeing. And we're embracing that at every level as a brand. The other thing is we made big investments early on in digital, both in terms of standing up a digital product engine that could introduce apps like Fender Play, which is our online learning platform, Fender Tune, which has been downloaded almost 8 million times. So we can tell you at what time of day people around the world are tuning their guitars. But also even expanding into how we market. So obviously investing in expanding our social channels, which, because we work with over 3,000 artists on a direct basis, we've had a real opportunity to both grow our platform with them, but also grow our platforms for them. And that's been investments in content and paid media and PR to amplify what they're doing. So I think, all of that pre-work for us in many ways sort of put us in a position where I think when the pandemic actually hit, I think we were all surprised by how seamlessly we sort of made the transition. And, like I mentioned, the artist relationships, it wasn't just us who were impacted by pandemic. Artists writ large were essentially put on hold from any sort of live performances. And so, because we also not only look to serve players and help bring more people in and the committed players, we also look to serve artists. We really opened up our platforms to the artist, and we introduced multiple different serialized concepts that they could shoot from their studios. In many instances, we turned the camera over to them and then got behind it with paid media and PR, really to amplify their voices. We partnered up with multiple artists to actually contribute to causes that they cared about. And I think, for us, to your question and sort of, making the transition, I think one of the things that we're very aware of is that we get to play in the jet stream of musical creativity. Mm-hmm. And that has a power to connect people in ways that few things do. I think throughout that, one of the things that we've tried to stay true to is just retaining that authentic relationship with the artist, but also retaining our authenticity in front of all the players that we serve on a regular basis. So while all this is going on, I think what blew us away and we weren't prepared for was just the massive influx of additional people who chose to start playing guitar. And I think we recently did a consumer survey just to even get a better handle on what that is looking like. Almost 16 million people picked up guitar in the last 2 years to get started. And that is a massive jump over where things were before that. That kind of gets into your next point, so I'll kind of hold back.
All right, that's incredible. 16 million people picked up guitar. I bet we all have, we know someone that did that. That's amazing.
Yes.
It's a great relationship builder if you happen to be looking for a date. It's a great media outlet if you happen to be looking to, develop content on the platform. It is a universal kind of way to connect and communicate, but I think we were not at all expecting that the influx would be that profound.
Wow, that's kind of incredible.
That's great. So Melissa, you thinking Fender sponsored guitar dates?
I think so. I don't even have to look at the data to know that if you play guitar, you are more likely to get a date. That is.
I feel like there's a show in that on Vice. I think we can all get together.
There's definitely a show on that. Brought to you by Verizon. We figured.
I was at the meeting when that started. Let's do that. That is amazing.
I feel like we just came up with an idea right now.
I think we did.
See, that's perfect, because now we're going to segue into messaging and creative and the pivots that you had to do there. And in the prep for this, and I'm going to go back to you, Nadja, to get started here. In the prep for this, one of the things that really resonated with me was you had to completely retool your listening quickly in order to get the messaging right. So go ahead, Nadja, take us away on messaging and creative.
I mean, the truth is for us, I mean, interestingly about Vice, I think, the latest data is that 80% of our audience, our consumers really trust the content coming from us. And that's because we have always had to really have a keen ear to actively listen to what's needed. During the pandemic, we had to lean into this even more. Cynicism, tokenism were kind of at an all-time high. So for us, we had to lead with empathy. We had to lead with consideration and transparency. And during that pandemic, we had a couple of our channels exploded. Like on Refining 29, we birthed Unbothered, which is a leading engagement channel for young, Black women. And they are just strictly unbothered. And it captured everything that was happening in the world right now. And right now, they've had probably an increase of over 90% of Instagram followers. And I've got brands who are clamoring to be part of this group. The Story Of, which is kind of what we've been doing, Vice goes behind the scenes on many artists. You obviously see, Evan, the opportunity for us to collaborate there. The Dark Side franchise has exploded as it really, really touches on a couple of things. It's really the truth that people don't necessarily want to tell. One of the things that really we've been doing well and has sparked and continue to fuel our creative belly is how we uncover these truths. We tell stories that no one's ever seen in ways that we've never done before, in ways that have never been heard of before. This is whether we're in Afghanistan or we're in Charlottesville, or with Alzo, down in South Carolina and Florida, looking at unfair practices amongst African Americans in terms of losing ground, which won him an Emmy. We are everywhere, but everywhere we do, we're uncovering a truth. And the reason why people come to us is because of how we listen, Bruce. It's because how we tell these stories. And if there's anything that we had to do in this pandemic, we doubled down on that. So whether it's the production of Gangs of London, and we get out the gate there, or what we've done with Flea in our studios, or Losing Ground, or any of the things that we've done, we're telling these stories that are uniquely placed. And these stories are the truths of our audience. You may not like the truth that they tell, but that's how we show up. We're going to tell their truth.
And for you, that's really resonated with your audience, even with some of your creators maybe not agreeing with all of the truth you put out there.
Now, I think I said to you, we had an interesting debate here at Vice. And I said, if you're talking about being in the US, some are blue and some are red. And in many ways, we are purple. And you may not like the fact that we are purple, but in many ways we are purple, which means you don't stand on the left or the right. You stand for whatever the truth is that you deem necessary. And that doesn't necessarily make us always the most popular, but it makes us the most truthful. And when you're able to have that raw kind of conversation with a target audience, when you're able to lean over to a partner, if it's a CMO, and say, let me tell you what they're really saying about your brand, what they're really saying, not what your partner may tell you they're saying, that level of transparency and truth is, you can't put a price tag on that. So we do not pimp out our audiences. We hold this data very close to our heart. We're actually developing an entire platform, the predictive platform of culture, that we're actually building a database that kind of pulls all this data together that will be launching next year. But that is part of why we've been able to do what we've been doing for so long. Vice has always stood for truth and culture. We've always been at the epicenter of culture. And what we were able to do for our audience is lean into it and listen and curate content even more bespoke than many of our competitors have done. And we'll continue to do so.
That is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Melissa, you're up next. Tell us your story.
Yeah, well, I talked about our campaign. I think, for us, and if you're a marketer listening or watching out there, what my experience has been, and I'm sure my peers here would say the same thing, is a powerful insight, a true insight, as Nadja was referring to, is what's going to drive that story, that message, that creative that's going to resonate. What OkCupid started to see shift in a dramatic way, and it really was happening in 2015, 2016, was people bringing issues in politics to their dating app. And what I mean by that is, if you live in New York City, like probably a lot of people listening, or London or San Francisco, you probably don't have a car, you don't have a yard. And so what are the ways that you signal what you care about? Well, you'll do that on your social media platforms. And increasingly people have been doing that on their dating app. And there's two things we love about that. One is dating apps have been getting a bit of a bad rap, and Gen Z in particular, for being shallow swipers, and it's hot or not, and people feeling really bad about that. And so having people bring like the substance and depth of who they are is really awesome. But also that is an ingredient to a successful, happy, healthy relationship, right? Imagine if you started dating someone, you're really into the environment and you're really into climate change activism, and you started dating someone that didn't think it was a thing, and always, didn't untick the box on Grubhub to get plastic forks and styrofoam container. Just imagine all the tiny little microfights you're going to have all day long. So we have been leaning into that in our messaging and creative in a really big way. And what we wanted to do is say, it's really hot that you care about this issue, whatever that is. It's hot to put that on your profile, and also giving people the data to show them that when you talk about these issues, you are more likely to get a message, and get on the date. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here for many people to be in your life for a while, and then you delete us, and you never come back to us again. And so, one of the powerful example of that was on Black Lives Matter. We are the only dating app matching people on how are you engaged in an issue? What do you feel about this movement? How are you engaging in it? And another great example of that, we scrambled when Texas SB 8 legislation rolled out, and we very quickly turned on a pro-choice badge. Reproductive rights is an important topic if you are dating. That is a real thing that you may encounter if you are dating someone, and Planned Parenthood has been a long-standing partner of OkCupid, and it's amazing. Within 24 hours, we had tens of thousands of people add the badge to their profile, men and women, and the data shows that you're more likely to get love if you're signaling that. So, and then it creates its own life on Twitter. And for OkCupid, it's important because this is our point of difference. This is why we exist, is you should know how your date feels about issues. And for some people, you don't have to agree, but that's what's hot. That's the turn on, is you have the good margarita and you're going to debate those issues, right? So that's been that's helped drive, kind of this renaissance of OkCupid. We're one of the OG brands in this space, but leaning into these moments that you're talking about with your friends on your social apps and making that a part of your dating experience and enabling you, it's optional, to make that a part of what's powering the algorithm has been really powerful for our brand. So for us, again, like to come back to that takeaway is like, what is the insight? What is driving your business, and what is driving the behavior of the people you're trying to bring in? And how do you make that a part of the product and a part of the creative?
That's fantastic. Andrew, you talked to me a little bit about having to expand the audience base that you were listening to as a feeder into the creative process. And I thought I'd turn it over to you next.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I maybe I just touch on a little bit of what Nadja kind of mentioned as well, in terms of for us, like the trust issue was a big one, especially at the beginning, because like the climate was just full of uncertainty and no one trusted anyone. And so I think it was paramount that that brands were taking on those leadership roles and helping to bring confidence to the broader communities, and trust as kind of like a guiding principle was one of the things that we really thought a lot about. And so I would say that our initial marketing response was to ensure that we were continuing to build trust in the brand, and not only through messages of reassurance, but through actions that also help. So one of the key messages that we put out at the very beginning, this was 2 weeks in, was we're here and we're ready, right? Which, again, like what I call the kind of the COVID response plethora of messages that hit it, during that time. It was a reassuring message. It gave customers and employees the information they needed, and we had 2 tracks where we were making sure that employees had resources to also get the latest information coming from the company, but then also for customers who were curious about stores being open or closed, and where they could get products and their service, wireless service or internet service. And there was just a lot of uncertainty at that time. So, and then we followed that up through action, which was super important as well. So in those early months, Verizon donated, I think it was about 56 million to COVID relief efforts, and mostly around first responders and small businesses, because they were the most impacted by all of this. But I would say that over the last 18 months, we've gone through many different waves where we've had to adapt to that ever-changing landscape, right? And it continues to change. But it was, again, focusing on the right messages in the right places. And we needed to assure our customers that the network was as reliable as ever. That's what we're known for, America's most reliable network. But, and Bruce, you mentioned this, in the first 90 days, we had around 520 billion texts and 58 billion phone calls and 10 trillion megabytes of data running on the network. So that's an insane kind of surge in terms of how the network needed to perform for people, clearly around very important things that were happening in people's lives. So we actually doubled down, because you mentioned about the budgets, and we doubled down on our marketing efforts to let customers know, employees and our partners, that we weren't going anywhere. We're here to stay, and we're here for you. And we were one of those first brands to go out, and I think with creative in the middle of March 2020. And I think also at the time, many brands were kind of shifting their brand look and feel. Ours didn't change, and part of that was because everyone had the challenge of production, right? In terms of like, how do I suddenly, go out there and shoot a bunch of stuff or put messages into the market that fundamentally don't represent what the brand looks, how the brand generally feels or behaves. And so that was a really big consideration for us. We had I would say the good fortune of an existing campaign structure that it was on white site, has customer stories, engineer stories, etc. So it was very purposeful not to shift the way in which the brand was showing up. Again, trust and building the confidence out there in the market to go like, guys, we're showing up the way that we always show up. This is our authentic, Verizon, and these stories are the same, and we're going to continue, obviously make sure that we're telling the stories that are relevant for you right now and then. But that was a really, I think something for us that was successful was because we were able to also repurpose some of the existing kind of content that we've created. We've created hundreds of these stories over the last couple of years. But that really helped us keep a brand message super clear, very consistent. And throughout the pandemic, we've always landed on thinking about what is the message first, pair it to the moment, make sure we're listening, and continue, that strategy. And we continue to evolve. I think it's really a balance of saying the right things at the right times that are in line with the current sentiment and the conversation in the marketplace. But it means that you've got to be very flexible, and you have to be very aware of the different inputs that are happening outside, like within your industry, but also very much outside of your industry.
I think that what I'm hearing, 3 great examples so far about not only pivoting to the response to the pandemic, but remaining authentic to your brand. And I know we hear that buzzword a lot, but I'm hearing it in your answers that you lived it, you actually did it, and that's absolutely commendable. Evan's got one of the best examples of being authentic to your brand and what they did in his pivot from a messaging and content standpoint. So Evan, go ahead.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, I think, like everybody mentioned, we had to shift across the board. And really, I think earlier, Naj, you mentioned it, just the changes in how do you create content, how do you source it, how do you align it? I think, before I get to the example, Bruce, that you're talking about, at the end of the day, we still have a gigantic and very loyal audience of guitar players that we need to service and provide inspiration to. And product innovation actually is one of the biggest things that drives us. So, as an example, when the pandemic hit at the end of last year, we were attempting to launch the biggest guitar series that we have as a company, which was the American Professional 2 series. And that builds on the American Professional series, which is used by more artists on more stages than any other electric guitars on the planet. So let that sink in for a second. It's not an inconsequential series, but we really wanted to use that platform to showcase the diversity and breadth of good artists who are out there. So that meant shooting content, not just in the US in multiple cities, but also in Europe in multiple countries, in Africa and in Asia. And it meant investing a lot more in content than we ever had before. We worked with Wyden and Kennedy to help us develop the launch video. But in the end, it ended up being so worth it because the response we got from our audience, from the media, but really important was the response we received from artists who just said, thank you for including artists who look like me, who sound like me, who have, who I've looked up to as my kind of heroes, was so rewarding. At the same time, on the product side, one of the guitars that's right behind me on my shoulder here, we also wanted to keep expanding the market while things were happening. And in addition to launching the first ever Billie Eilish signature ukulele, we also launched her signature Stratocaster. And as the first Black female artist to ever have a signature Strat, it was so important to us that we really took the time to get that right. And I think, we sort of forced that through the supply chain. We forced it through the sales organization. We forced it through the rest of the calendar. But in the end, she is one of the most incredible artists on the planet. We are beyond enthusiastic to be affiliated with her. And, it was amazing to see from a relationship that started 5 years earlier to then 2 Grammys, an Oscar, a signature guitar, and then playing the Super Bowl. We continue to build on that relationship. And I think had we not done that, I think it would have been a different relationship. And even though, she doesn't need us to, develop her career, to think that we could have a hand in helping her kind of get that stage, I think is really great. But I think probably the biggest thing that we did, at least in terms of being a mover for us in connecting with our audience and staying true to who we are, really just started as a goodwill gesture. And I think it was literally the week before everything went on lockdown. Myself, our head of digital, our CEO, we all had a conversation about what we could do to kind of ease people's burden. And I referenced earlier that we launched Fender Play in 2017. It's a digital online subscription app that is essentially engineered to help beginners learn how to play guitar. It's almost got 4,000 pieces of content, multiple genres, electric, acoustic, bass, and ukulele. But we made the decision heading into COVID, let's offer it for free. And so for essentially 90 days, we gave the world access to Fender Play for free. And we thought, maybe 100,000 people would take us up on the offer. Maybe that would happen over the course of a month. But I think it was a Friday, and by Monday, we already had 100,000 people sign up for the offer. And within a matter of weeks, we had almost 1 million people take us up on the offer. And I think, what was so interesting for us, obviously exciting to see that kind of pickup, but we had almost 200 artists with huge followings actually personally advocate for this. We had influencers across the board, jump into it. And I think what it showed us was the incredible latent appetite for music and for guitar. And when I referenced the 16 million earlier who came in, we had no idea heading into it that this was going to be a part of a movement that big, but it's completely shifted the way that we think about guitar. And, I consistently describe us now as a 75-year-old startup where, we are just learning the potential of what the brand can be from a digital ecosystem and kind of metaverse perspective where, Fender Play, Fender Tune are just the beginnings of where we hope to go. Fascinating.
More opportunity out of issues and problems that crop up that we have to answer to. We are running very short of time, so I'm going to ask for 1-minute answers on the communication dissemination side so that we can wrap up. But it's been a great discussion. So Nadja, over to you on getting the message out. Like you've retooled the content, you've got the plans shifted, now you've got to get the message out to the audience, and they're in a different place. You're on mute.
Yeah, so we're at a unique advantage because we're able to leverage all of our platforms, audio, news, video, and as well as word of mouth. We have our brand ambassadors that are out there as well. So for us, we're able to kind of turn on all of these channels for us to disseminate our content. The best example of Vice disseminating content is through the very people that are consumers of Vice themselves. So for us, we have an studios business, both Pulse Films and Vice Studios, our news division, audio, video, all of those channels are turned on for us to disseminate information. So for us, we're kind of at the epicenter of it. So we maximize our multimedia format.
Excellent. Melissa, getting the message out.
Yeah, I mean, I think what a year TikTok has had, right? I think for us, that's an exciting platform, right? And when someone discovers you and shares that on TikTok, it develops legs tenfold. So that's been an exciting platform for us. But I think like a lot, for us, it is, I've never been in a marketing position where you knew exactly where to spend your dollars and what was going to happen, right? There's this kind of famous saying, and sorry, I can't attribute it because I remember who originally said this. It was a much more famous and credible CMO than myself. And it was, half of my dollars are spent on the wrong thing. I wish someone would tell me which half. And so for us, I don't have a crisp answer to that. I think I'm going to be really honest and say it's about testing and trying, and COVID upended some things where, we did pull back on, we love out of home. I love that as a medium. I think it brings your message to light in a bold, confident, like in your face way. But in COVID, that did not make sense. It's great to see that it's back, and we're certainly back there, but we're always testing and trying where to reach people, whether it's podcasts, it's TikTok. I obviously got to look at Vice a little more closely. We love Vice. So that's my honest answer, Bruce. That's my final answer.
Great. Andrew.
Yeah.
Getting the message out.
I would say one of the big pivots we had to make was around the live experiences, right? So we've got an amazing portfolio of music partnerships, NFL sporting partnerships, amongst many others. And I think making that pivot quickly to kind of meet the audience where they were accelerated the virtualization of a lot of digital experiences. So we embraced that. We went all in. I mean, literally within 2 weeks, we kind of took, Dave Matthews was supposed to be playing in concert. We had him in his studio. We did a live stream with him. That became the Pay It Forward live series. Over 10 weeks, we also included gaming into that. So people were obviously, streaming with watching gamers as well. Worked with, some amazing talent there. And that ended up being 90 million views over that 10 weeks, which was like almost 5 million, per night. We did it Tuesdays and Thursdays. We literally went from kind of running a show, a weekly show. That was nutty. That was kind of like, can we do it? And we're like, let's try it out. But we learned a lot in that, in terms of just how can you start to create these virtual experiences. Then we did the same with the NFL for Super Bowl. Can't do a live, on the ground activation. We created the NFL, stadium within Fortnite creative mode. That became, again, one of the biggest activations in Fortnite. We had about 40 million people come through there. So what we learned was, okay, like, you can do both. You can do the live in-person activations, and then you can get scale through these digital activations that we're getting numbers that we never would have dreamt of, previously. And so that's the path we're taking forward. It's gonna be a hybrid approach. We're gonna do both live and digital, and open up our aperture to audiences who are able to do both now.
Great lesson in experimentation there, both on top of what Melissa said, and Nadja and what they're doing. This idea of experimentation and trying different things can really pay dividends, as Evan saw with the free learning app. Evan, final final, bring us home with the
All right,
communications.
I'll do this in 60 seconds or less. I know we're kind of long on time. I mean, I think the fundamental thing for us is we're just doubling down from a digital perspective across the board. Content, paid media, but also really tools and connective kind of tissue that brings new people into the market. So to the earlier point Melissa made about TikTok, we launched our first ever branded TikTok channel just 3 weeks ago. We already have over 100,000 followers. We're working directly with artists and creators on the platform. Really excited about that. Secondly, we're expanding our funnel. We introduced something called the Beginner's Hub, which is essentially intended to help demystify the selection process because we know how difficult that's going to be. But I think the future for us is continuing to expand and lean into some of the threads that, for better or for worse, the pandemic situation sort of forced us to pull.
Hey, Bruce, the one thing I just want to add that everyone has said is we all leaving a little bit up to the audience themselves. Let's not try to be too prescriptive about how we communicate with them, but let them lead how they want to be communicated to. I think that's something that all of us have said on this panel today.
It is. That's a great way to end it, because we now have so many ways that we can listen to our audience if we just actually do it and listen. So you can let that inform all of the questions we answered today. I want to thank everyone. This has been a learning experience for me. I've just loved the content that you guys have just put out for everybody. And I think this one is going to be a big hit on demand for the conference attendees. Jasmine, back over to you.
Thank you.
I completely agree. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you to Nadja, Melissa, Evan, and Andrew, and of course to Bruce, Brian, and our sponsors at Hive9. Thank you so much for getting involved. Now I'm going to quickly pass it over to my colleague Aaron Jackson of Reuters Events, who is doing a quick fireside chat, a 15-minute fireside chat with Joe Marinucci, the Chief Executive Officer for Digital Media Solutions. This is not one to miss, so dive in to consumer-driven journeys, how real-time data is the key to understanding and engaging your audience. Over to you, Aaron.